Welcome back again. So we are continuing discussing Kiswahili in the context of South Africa. This episode, which is part three, I'm dealing with the perfection of Kiswahili language as a language of literatures. So in my previous presentation, I explained how Kiswahili, which was actually seen as a language of criminals, ended up being spread out of Tanzania to neighboring countries because Muslims were trading to those Uganda and other areas. It's yes to spread. You got to remember that Islam is a cultures and religion, so it was much easy for it to spread as compared to Fanakalo and Totintal. They didn't spread outside South Africa. Maybe some migrant workers from Malawi or Zimbabwe, they might have learned it, but they didn't take it to our own countries. It's remained into South African townships and Fanakalo. Whereas Kiswahili uh, spread outside. And I'll show you in the last part uh, of this presentation what was the reason? What was the reason for Kiswahili to spread? There's a reason why it spreads to other corners or around the world, around Africa, as compared to those in Thailand, South Africa, and Fanakolo, which didn't come outside. They were not popular outside the countries. They were only concentrated in South African townships. So let's look at the perfection of Kiswahili as a language of literature in the East Africa. Many scholars and experts and historians believe that writing Kiswahili language for Africans was popularized by a man named Muhammad Abdul. Muhammad Abdullah, as a writer of novels, was born in 1918 in the present day Tanzania, in the coastal areas, the Tanzania where uh, the language originated from. Many sources claim that he was a devoted Muslim, and he is also credited as the man who brought this language to broader community of East Africans who love literatures, African literature during colonial era. For me, as a person, I believe that this guy could be one of the fathers of decolonization project in Africa. Because again, this can be disputed uh, because some people say no, why he became a father of decolonization because Kiswahili is not a African language. So I'll explain why I think this guy was actually a fathers of one of the fathers of decolonization. The reason maybe some people will suggest that maybe the reason why many of his books receive attention or published is the fact that in his books he portrayed black people negatively. Those Kiswahili books that he wrote, those novels, the African fictional characters were portrayed as a criminal. All criminal characters in Muhammad Abdul books were black people, and they spoke or they communicate with each other in Kiswahili. Unlike in South Africa, where where Fana Kalo was spoken by blacks and was spoken by white and masters. In his play, in his novel, this guy, it was actually he black. The character were blacks. When he wrote black criminal have done this and this. So uh, as compared to South Africa, remember that, like I said, during the time of apartheid, every criminal used to be associated with Tsotsintal. But in Kenya, in Tanzania, criminals were associated with Kiswahilis. So this guy, Muhammad Abdul, his novels, he portrayed black people who speak Kiswahili as a criminals. In my view, there is no doubt that Abdul was not writing for Africans audience. You can't write for African audience when you portray black people in negative ways. He was, of course, writing for colonial Arabs and Western readers, not native Africans. That's why he was portraying African negatively in his novels. For example, uh, in in his work, you know, the colonial law enforcement official known as a detective used strange ways to solve crime committed by Africans. This plots dominate most of his writing. The writing which is actually colonial stereotype of Africans. Africans have this and this, you know. So I believe he clear justified that Kiswahili is a language of criminals. Just like in South Africa, where Tsotsintal was seen as a criminal of languages to someone as compared to people who speak English or who speak Fanakalo. So if you speak Fanakalo, you are not seen as a criminal as compared to somebody who speaks Tsotsintal. There's a power relation. There was a languages because it's spoken by masses. It was actually a criminal languages. But if you look at the writing of this guy, a pioneer of Kiswahili literatures, one of the pioneers of Kiswahili literatures, Abdul, Muhammad Abdul never wrote about Arabs and European fictional characters who were committing crime against Africans. He was unfair, you know. The question would be, if had he wrote about Arabs who were actually cheating Africans on business or European colonizers, would his book, do you think his book would have been popularized or published if he said nothing about something negative about Arab or whites? So I won't answer this question. This is for you to answer, you know. So, but having said that, he wrote approximately 4 books, plus minus 4 books. But honestly speaking, he laid a concrete foundation of inspiring African writers to write about African languages during colonial eras when it was not a norm to do so. So my point is that Muhammad Abdul, though he was writing during his time, he actually contributed to formalize the writing of literature of Kiswahili on novels. So therefore, he contributed. He laid the foundations. You know. So what is very important here, it's not to investigate whether he was doing it properly or improperly. The matter is that he laid foundation. So let's start from there. In the next episode, I'm going to be looking at this experience. How do we relate this with South Africa? So that's part 4. Thank you.